Hey there guys, so right here in front of me is a system that I've been very excited to take a look at. This is the FIREBAT AM02. This is a mini PC that I have seen on AliExpress on sale for quite a while now, and it seems to be one of the best value mini PCs that you can buy on the market today. If we pop it out of its packaging, we can take a look at the system itself, but this is going to be a very budget system. In terms of price, we are looking at a retail price of $225 on AliExpress right now, though you can use a coupon on top of that. That is down in the description. But I will say that FIREBAT does also include this card here that you can either get a 3-year warranty for the system, or they will bribe you for $20 and a review of the system on Amazon. Not exactly a great look, but a lot of budget brands end up doing this. In terms of what else is included in the system, it's pretty much the pretty standard assortment of a VESA mount. We do of course have a power brick, and this is a relatively chunky power brick. I'm not a big fan of this style of design. The big brick right here just makes it very inconvenient to plug in a lot of scenarios. It just ends up taking up so much space. I much prefer when it's a standard cable and the brick is really just somewhere in the middle. But this is a relatively high power one. You can see that we are looking at 19 volts at 5 amps, so that comes out to a 95 watt power adapter. Pretty standard for a system that is rocking a Ryzen 5 6600H. And that is what we're dealing with here. This is a system that is rocking a Ryzen 5 6600H that is paired with 16 gigabytes of RAM, and we are looking at a 512 gigabyte SSD. Overall, pretty standard. Now, looking at the system itself, its design is pretty interesting. It's very gamery. In fact, the design of this system looks very similar to the Ace Magician system that we just took a look at, the AM06 Pro. They both have very cheap plastic designs that seem to have a similar design philosophy. Even this corner over here has a very similar design between the two. Both of them don't feel super high quality, but they get the job done, and at the price points that they're coming in, they're very competitive. But neither one of these systems is going to win any kind of design awards. As you can see around the body of both systems, it's pretty basic, pretty standard overall, a very plasticky feeling design, but on both systems it seems to get the job done. But before we talk about the I/O, I want to open this system up because I want to see how easy it is to get in here. Really, the main thing that attracted me is the fact that it has a pull tab very similar to B-Link systems. One thing I do want to point out is that the screws seem to be pretty deep in here, so I could not use my iFixit screwdriver to open this thing up. I pretty much had to look around, and I found a screwdriver that is a little bit longer and thinner so that it can actually get it in there and unscrew the screws. The screws themselves are not very big. The threading itself is pretty standard, but they are just pretty deep in there, so you are going to need a long neck screwdriver. So if you're using something like an iFixit kit, you better hope you have something that has like an extender on it, or you have just some other spare screwdriver laying around. After you unscrew all the screws though, it becomes very easy to get in here. The pull tab works perfectly fine. There is no major resistance. One thing I did notice immediately though is that right here on the lid, it does seem to have what seems to be a 2.5-inch drive mounting setup, but looking at the board itself, I couldn't really seem to find any SATA connection anywhere. If I had to guess, I would say that this is probably just because FIREBAT is reusing this chassis. We have seen it used in other systems before. In fact, they do have a version of this system available with the N100, but as you can see on the board, all you do get is a second NVMe slot, but you do not get any kind of SATA, at least from what I can see on the board. There is no SATA header, and it didn't come with a SATA adapter. One thing you are probably noticing though is that single channel memory. Now this is to be expected. I pretty much assumed just from looking at the spec sheet that this was going to be single channel memory, so nothing surprising here, but that is going to affect our performance, at least GPU wise on this system. But we are looking at 16 gigabytes at least, so you can get another 16 gigabyte kit and throw it in here. But let's get this system plugged in and see how it performs. So starting off, I want to talk about the performance in Cinebench R23, where we ended up getting a score of 9,660. A pretty great result overall, and the best performing 6600H that I've ever taken a look at. In fact, it's performing very similar to the Ryzen 5 5600G, which is a desktop part, so it does have a higher TDP, and overall, it can get some pretty high levels of performance. So the fact that this mobile part is able to perform at effectively the same level is an overall great result. And of course, do keep in mind that both of these are on the same CPU architecture. They are both based off of Zen 3, though the 6600H is supposed to be Zen 3 Plus essentially. But really, this came with more efficiency gains than performance gains, which is why they're performing very similar. I wouldn't be surprised if I tested the 5600G right now again. It would end up performing pretty much within the same level of the 6600H. It really just depends on the version of Windows that you're on at the time. But where this falls in line in comparison to the rest of the market is that it's not that far off from any systems that are rocking the Ryzen 7 5800H or the 5800U, and it handily beats out systems that are rocking the Ryzen 7 5700U, since that is based off of Zen 2. And of course, it leaves all Zen 2 base 6-core APUs in the dust. It is just a pretty massive performance uplift, at least multi-core wise, and I think well in line with the level of performance that you would expect with an overall budget system here. You are really going to struggle to get better performance than this at this price point, and the only thing that's really giving it any kind of competition is the 6800H that you can get in the FIREBAT A6. But in terms of anything below this price point, you are going to be seeing some massive differences overall. In fact, we have to zoom out the chart quite a bit to finally start to see the competition that is closer in line with this in terms of price, where you will find systems with the N150 at around that $200 price range. And even systems that are rocking things like the Ryzen 5 5600U and the equivalent of that do end up falling behind here. And it does end up beating out other systems with the 6600H. As I mentioned, this is the best performing 6600H that I've seen so far. Though do keep in mind that the single core performance of this system ends up falling in line with pretty much where you would expect it to be. Obviously, it's not going to see any boosts in performance here because of the fact that no increase in TDP is going to boost your single core performance. It's pretty much hard limited by whatever the maximum clock speed is set to. And because these are locked CPUs, you cannot boost the maximum clock speed. You're pretty much just set to whatever it is that the system came with out of the factory. And OEMs are not allowed to change that at all. They can adjust the TDP, but they themselves cannot adjust the individual clock speeds of the chips. Of course, I did mention that this is the best performing 6600H system that I've taken a look at, and well, this right here, the power usage while running Cinebench R23, should explain to you why that's the case. You can see that we are using 70 watts here. That does mean that the system is configured with a TDP of 45 watts. Keep in mind that while you're playing games and doing day-to-day tasks, you're almost never going to see the power utilization this high. You're really only going to see power utilization this high when it's a all CPU core workload, which doesn't really seem to happen ever. When it comes to the idle power draw though, we are looking at anywhere between 13 to 15 watts most of the time, so you could expect power utilization with a system like this to vary anywhere between that 15 watts all the way up to 70 watts. But do remember that you're going to be a lot closer to that 15 watts most of the time in day-to-day tasks than you will be to 70. But if you are going to be playing games and really pushing the system overall, do expect to see some higher power utilization than what you will normally find in systems under $200. Still, that TDP does translate to some excellent levels of performance, and we're going to be taking a look at Megabonk here, which has become one of my favorite games to test out on these systems, specifically because it is one of my most played games on Steam recently. It's really the only game I've been playing, and it seems to run really well on the vast majority of systems out there. And I love showcasing games like this because if we're being 100% honest, I could get away with playing games on this system and just ignore my gaming PC for at least the next couple of weeks, specifically because I become obsessed with titles like this that end up running really well on the vast majority of hardware. Now, we are running Megabonk here at the lowest in-game graphics settings. I know if you're someone that has been playing this title, you might not even know that it has graphics settings, because why would you need to turn anything down? But considering that we are dealing with single channel memory here, it is better to turn things down, though you don't need to go super aggro with the lowest settings, as you can see, because of the fact that we're getting 1% lows that are above 60 and an FPS average that is almost at the triple-digit range. This is a great result to see, considering the fact that, again, we are dealing with single channel memory, and this is a game that might not be hard to run on a lot of systems, but systems below the $200 price range, this alone can be a pretty difficult game to run, especially for systems that are rocking Alder Lake N or Twin Lake based SoCs. Their integrated graphics paired with the single channel memory that is inherent to those types of of chips do not pair well with even a light game like this, while this system handles it no problem even with the single channel memory. Of course, don't let the impressive performance in Megabonk fool you. That single channel memory is going to end up becoming a limiting factor, and it's going to become a limiting factor in a lot of titles. As you can see here, Counter-Strike 2 is normally a title that would run pretty decently on a system like this. Having access to that 660M integrated graphics is a nice plus, especially since this game got its update to Counter-Strike 2, but that single channel memory is giving us some issues in both our 1% lows and our FPS average, but it's really the 1% lows that suffer the most just because it is going below 60, and for a title like this you really don't want to see that, especially since we're already getting pretty aggressive with the graphics, though I didn't turn on FSR, and I really always try to avoid using FSR on a title like this. So it really is kind of just a non-starter, and it's kind of disappointing to see this, but not too surprising considering that we already knew we were going into a single channel memory situation. I will say though, this 660M is a surprisingly decent performer. I mean, you are looking at about 50% better performance than the top of the line Vega iGPU that we got before the switch over to RDNA. So even with a halving of the performance because of the lack of dual channel memory, we're still looking at some pretty great performance in some of the lighter titles out there that are still very popular. As you can see here with Rainbow Six Siege X, we are running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR 2.0 at the quality preset, but this gives us some pretty tight FPS average and 1% lows, so there is really not much fluctuation at all between the two there, and that's going to give you a very consistent experience, and that's not too bad considering this is a above 60 FPS average. But it's just not the clearest image ever, and if you're somebody that likes to play this game competitively, the visuals here are really just not going to be enough for you. But it is at least a playable experience, and that really is more than you can say for the vast majority of systems in this price tier. Of course, for a system like this, you are going to be better off sticking with much older titles. Here you can see Grid 2, which is one of my favorite go-to titles to take a look at older games and see how they perform, because it has a great built-in benchmark, and visually speaking, it does hold up really well even at the lower graphics settings, so it can kind of give you a realistic expectation of what you can hope to see when you're trying to play games from the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, or early PS4 and Xbox One era titles. Overall, the game here running at the high graphics settings does end up giving us some great levels of performance. That does mean that you are likely going to get some great results on these older titles, even with the single channel memory. Though if gaming is a priority for you, I would really consider that upgrade, but the good thing is that you can do that later down the line. It's not a necessary upgrade to make this thing usable. It really is just more of a cherry on top on a system that is already a really great value, even with its configuration like this. As I mentioned though, this is a very easy upgrade to do, and of course we are going to be upgrading this system to dual channel memory. I'm just going to take out the one stick that's in there and already put in this dual channel kit that I already have. This is 5600 memory. That doesn't really matter. This is going to run at its maximum speed of 4800. That's just the maximum speed that this APU supports. It's going to be the same if you get a system with the 6800H. The maximum speed that this hardware supports is 4800. That doesn't matter. You don't need to go out on the internet and only buy memory that is at that speed, because this is JDAC spec. The memory will automatically run at whatever the maximum speed of your hardware is going to support. So you can get 5600 megahertz memory and put it in here and it'll run at 48 without any issues. And yes, you are going to want to do this upgrade if you're going to want to see some big gains in your gaming performance. Here in Megabonk, I was able to turn up the graphics settings to almost their maximum. It's not 8 times anti-aliasing, it's only 2 times, but everything else is maxed out, and really this isn't how I would play the game on this system. I would turn things down more towards a medium range just to boost the level of performance that we're getting here. But even in this most nightmare scenario where we're already also at the end of the level, so there are a ton of enemies spawning in, it still performs really well, and really the most impressive thing to me is those frame time charts. They're very smooth, very consistent. There's maybe the occasional occasional spike here and there, but it will not ruin your gaming experience at all. And this is overall a great result because you have two options here. If you want to maximize the visual quality here, you can and still get a very playable experience, or you can turn things down and get a high refresh rate gaming experience from this system in this title, and that's beautiful to see. You're not going to get that in any other systems within this price range or below it. And a high refresh rate gaming experience is the important takeaway there, because you really do see a massive increase in performance in a lot of titles, where we went from having a relatively passable experience on Counter-Strike that I would find that the vast majority of people realistically wouldn't want to play. We go from that to something that is almost in the triple digits in terms of FPS average, and our 1% lows are now comfortably above 60. So this becomes a vastly different gaming experience just from upgrading the memory. And that's really something that you're not going to see in a lot of titles. And that's not really something you're going to see in a lot of systems out there, mostly because when we're looking at this price category, that, you know, $200 to $230, $250 price range, a lot of the times we are looking at about the best configurations of lower tier systems. So think something like the N150, but it's rocking 32 gigabytes of RAM or 16 gigabytes of RAM, and it has a 1 terabyte SSD, you know, things like that, where they maximize everything else, but at the end of the day, the limiting factor is that CPU that they went with. That's really what this is competing against, and when it comes to that, it's really punching well above its weight class, especially once you upgrade it. And here's one that I'm only just now realizing that I forgot to test with just a single stick of memory, but we do have Alien Isolation here running at the ultra graphic settings at 1080p, everything maxed out. We're getting a pretty much 60 FPS average in this title. That means that you are going to be able to play these older titles at quality settings that are above what people played with on console at the time. So really not a bad result at all, especially considering that this is a relatively easy upgrade to do. Now that is the FIREBAT AM02. We've taken a look at how it performs. We've upgraded it. Now what is the conclusion on this system? Well, let's run through some of the things that I forgot to talk about. So let's talk about the I/O of this system. Now we are looking immediately here. You're going to see the dual Ethernet ports. Do not get excited. This is dual gigabit Ethernet. You are not looking at 2.5 gigabit. Realistically, at this price point, we weren't going to be seeing dual 2.5 gigabit. Of course, we do have the dual display ports. We have display and HDMI, so a great combo there. I do like to see the mix of both. It gives you more flexibility out there, so if you need to hook up to a TV, you can, but if you want to hook up to a high refresh rate monitor that also has a great resolution, you can. And of course, we have the dual USB ports, though one of them is a USB 3.0. If we move things to the front, you can see that we also have dual USB 3.0 in the front. We have a USB Type-C, we have a headphone microphone jack here, and of course we do have a power button and a recessed reset switch. This is a pretty standard I/O overall, nothing that is a standout here, and for the most part, one of the areas where FIREBAT does end up cutting some corners here. But really what you're getting here is a fast performing system for a great budget. You can very clearly see where FIREBAT ended up cutting some corners just to really hit this price point, but I think that they were very strategic with what they did here. You know, if we compare it to a system that has a very similar configuration here, the Boss Game P5, this is also rocking a Ryzen 5 6600H. It has 24 gigabytes of RAM and it has a 1 terabyte SSD. This, at its base version with 16 gigabytes of RAM, retails for around $300. Now, this specific configuration seems to have disappeared from the market and has been replaced with a higher tier version, but the 6600H in here does perform worse than the FIREBAT does, and in all of its lifespan, the Boss Game has been a more expensive system. Now, it is a nicer design. I do like the system overall. It is a quieter system, but that also has to do with the fact that it does have a lower TDP. And while that does make a difference in terms of the multi-core performance, keep in mind that single-core performance is going to be identical between the two. But if you're trying to maximize your performance overall, the FIREBAT AM02 is just punching well above its weight. In fact, really the only system on the market today that I can find that is a better deal is the FIREBAT A6. The A6 kind of makes the AM02 a irrelevant system. The price difference between the two is about $20. And on the FIREBAT A6, we are looking at a Ryzen 7 6800H, so 2 more cores on the CPU, and of course we do have 6 more cores on the iGPU versus the 660M that is in the FIREBAT AM02. So a really really massive leap in terms of GPU performance. While the CPU is going to be a lot more bespoke, you're really only going to see that upgraded in scenarios where you're going to be pushing that CPU to its maximum. But at a $20 price difference, I just don't see a reason to get anything but the FIREBAT A6. Really, the AM02 is only a consideration if for some reason the A6 is sold out and you just need a mini PC and you're not looking to spend a ton of money. FIREBAT really is suffering from their own success here, but more importantly, they are beating out all of the competition out there that is using Zen 3 or Zen 2 based APUs at this price point. Really, a lot of these systems are going to be rocking Vega graphics, and that's just not going to be able to compete at all with RDNA 2 on these systems. And really, this is so impressive because there are systems out there that are more expensive than this that are still rocking Vega graphics. So this is such a killer way to get into RDNA graphics so that you are ready for the future. Why spend the money on a system today that is not even getting driver updates? Because Vega integrated graphics right now are stuck on the 25.8.1 drivers, so all the way back in August. Meanwhile, these are rocking the most recent drivers, which are the 25.10.2 drivers. So I'm going to link both of these systems down below because they really are both worth considering, but if the A6 is available today, there is just no reason to buy the AM02. So check them out down below. I'll catch you guys in the next one.